Before steel, before concrete, and before modern engineering, people built structures that still dominate skylines centuries later. Medieval architecture was not accidental. It was shaped by belief, power, fear, and human ambition working together in stone. Some of these buildings were so ambitious they risked collapse, and some did. So how did medieval builders make stone feel weightless? And why did Europe eventually stop building like this? In the early Middle Ages, architecture was shaped by uncertainty. After the collapse of Roman authority, cities were smaller, resources were limited, and safety mattered more than beauty. Around the 11th and 12th centuries, churches and halls were built in what we now call the Romanesque style. These buildings used thick stone walls, small windows, and rounded arches. Interiors were dark and enclosed. Strength came before elegance. Architecture felt grounded, heavy, and defensive. From the late 12th century onward, something changed. Builders across Europe began experimenting with new structural ideas that allowed buildings to grow taller, lighter, and more expressive. This was the beginning of Gothic architecture. Pointed arches distributed weight more efficiently than rounded ones. Ribbed vaults replaced solid stone ceilings, reducing pressure on walls. Flying buttresses carried weight outward, away from the interior. It was like moving a building's weight from its walls into a skeletal frame of stone. The result was revolutionary. Buildings no longer pressed downward, they reached upward. Cathedrals like Chartres Cathedral and Notre Dame de Paris filled their interiors with colored light. Stained glass was no longer decoration, it shaped experience. Light symbolized the divine, and architecture became a way to guide emotion, attention, and belief. These structures were not built quickly. A cathedral could take 50, sometimes 100 years to complete. A boy might begin hauling stone as an apprentice and grow old before the same building was finished. There were no modern blueprints. Knowledge was passed through practice and experience. Mistakes were permanent, collapse was always a possibility. What survives today is what succeeded. Cathedrals were also social projects. They were funded by bishops, kings, guilds, and ordinary townspeople. A cathedral was a city's pride and identity. Pilgrims brought trade, construction brought work. Architecture became a shared effort on a scale medieval Europe had never seen before. The same principles shaped castles, walls, and fortified towns. Where cathedrals expressed faith, castles expressed authority. Thick walls, narrow windows, and elevated keeps reflected a world shaped by conflict and control. Architecture did not just shelter people, it shaped how power was seen and felt. By the 14th century, Gothic architecture had reached its height. Spires grew taller, decoration became more elaborate. But Europe itself was changing. Population loss from plague reduced labor, long wars drained resources. And most importantly, ideas began to shift. By the 15th century, architects in Italy began looking backward instead of upward. They studied ancient Roman ruins and embraced symmetry, proportion, and classical order. This movement became the Renaissance. Gothic architecture did not fail, it was replaced. Europe's idea of beauty changed. Vertical drama gave way to balance and restraint. By the 16th century, medieval architecture was no longer the dominant style. Some Gothic buildings were modified. Others were abandoned or dismantled. The medieval architectural tradition faded, not because it lacked skill, but because society had moved in a different intellectual direction, yet it never disappeared. Today, medieval buildings still define historic city centers and cultural memory. When Notre Dame burned in 2019, the global reaction showed that these structures are not distant relics. They still matter emotionally, symbolically, and culturally. Restoring them is not just about saving stone. It is about preserving a way of thinking, patient, communal, and built for the long term. Medieval architecture also reminds us what humans can achieve without modern technology. These buildings were not designed for quick returns or short lifespans. They were meant to outlast their builders. In a modern world focused on speed and efficiency, they ask an uncomfortable question. What are we building today that will still be meaningful centuries from now? The rise and fall of medieval architecture is not just a story about buildings. It is a story about ambition, belief, power, and identity, carved into stone and still speaking to us if we are willing to look up. Here on the British Way, we explore history, places, and everyday life through calm, reflective films. That, my friend, is the British Way.